Steve Martin in the movie Parenthood, where he's filling in for his son's birthday party, and because the clown didn't come, or the cowboy didn't come, and he makes this mangled, pathetic balloon thing, and then he says, "Your lower intestine." And I was reading his book, which I really recommend. It's called Born Standing Up, his new book about his many years in stand-up comedy. And he talks about that he was a balloon-making kid in Disneyland. And I think he started to work at Disneyland at age 10. And for a while he was a magician, and then for a while he was a balloon maker. Thank you. Okay, I was told 2 days before I came to the convention that I was supposed to make a speech on this occasion. That will not be happening. But I would like to talk to you about a number of things that are going on in my life, and then let you ask questions. I'm sure you have burning questions to ask me. I'm Connie Willis, and I'm the Toastmaster for the World Fantasy Convention. I am a little at a loss in fantasy. I usually write science fiction, and I was thinking about what I was going to say about fantasy, and thinking you have no business saying anything about fantasy. You clearly don't know anything. The experts are all here, and you should let them talk about fantasy. I do occasionally write fantasy. My story, Inside Job, is about a psychic who, well, I used to say a fake psychic until someone pointed out that all psychics are fake. So, a psychic who accidentally starts channeling someone who you would not expect a psychic to actually channel. And my first novel, Lincoln's Dreams, I've always considered to be mostly a ghost story, although there is a science fictional explanation for that. And I love fantasy. I've always loved fantasy. From the very beginning of my childhood, the books I was always gravitating toward were fantasy and science fiction, although I didn't know that they were called that until far later. I remember in the back of my awful Dick and Jane reader, one of the first books ever printed, there was one story about a flying horse. And I really don't remember the story at all, except that there was an illustration that this flying horse was soaring over a nighttime landscape with the lights of the towns and the trees and the moonlight below. And how wonderful that was, and how much better than Dick and Jane and their stupid dog. So I was always drawn to that. When I got my library card, the very first books that I checked out were the Wizard of Oz books. And from then on, anytime I could find any fantasy things, that is what I picked. Although, as I say, I didn't know it was a separate thing. They were just the kind of stories I liked. When I was a kid living in Denver, Academy Matinee was on from 3 to 5, and those were old movies, the kind of thing you see on AMC now, or Turner Movie Classics. They were mostly black and whites of the 30s. Well, I don't know, we only have black and white TV, so I made in color. But mostly black and white movies in the 30s and 40s. And among them were some wonderful fantasy classics like The Enchanted Cottage, and Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and A Guy Named Joe. So my absolute favorite of all time was a movie that I did not know the name of, or the name of any of the people that were in it at the time. And so this made it absolutely impossible to ever find it again. And it taught me a valuable lesson about science fiction conventions, because when I was talking to a friend of mine about the fact that I've never been able to find this movie again, and he said, "Oh, you just need to ask at the next science fiction convention you're at. Science fiction fans know everything." And I was like, yeah, but this is really pretty obscure. So the next time I was in a a group of people with a fairly large audience. I said, okay, there's this movie, and I don't know who's in it, and I don't know what it's called, and I don't know when it came out, but it's about these people, and they're in England, and they're traveling on a ship, to a passenger liner to the United States during the war, so all the running lights are off, and there's something very strange about the ship. I didn't even get this far, and somebody said, it's called Between Two Worlds. Someone else said, it's a remake of Outward Bound. Somebody else said, starring Edmund Glenn and Green Street. That's proving that it was true, that science fiction fans know everything. So I was delighted that I was then able to scour in those pre-Netflix days. I was able to scour the listings and finally was able to watch the movie again. It's just as wonderful. A second go-round. If you are not familiar with the movie, I highly recommend it. Between Two Worlds, it's called. Or you can look at, if you forget the name of the movie, you can look it up under Edmund Gwynn or Sidney Greenstreet on IMDb, which I consider to be God's greatest gift to the world so far. It's Internet Movie Database. I mean, it has saved my life. I used to have to call my daughter and make her go see movies. And I'd say, okay, we just saw this movie, and the friend of the friend in the second half, the one with the brown shirt, who is that? And then my poor child would have to go to the movie in California, whether she wanted to see it or not, and then come back and report, okay, that guy was on Firefly, and he was in the episode about, and so now she's free from this terrible enslavement because I can just look it up on IMDb. And the other night we were watching the first Sherlock. How many of you have seen Sherlock? Oh my God, it's so good. It's so great. This is the new British updating of Sherlock Holmes. Wonderful. But the guy who plays Dr. Watson, we watched like the first 10 minutes of it. And I told my husband, stop, put it on pause now. I have to go look this up. It's driving me crazy. I knew it was one of those that I knew that I was never going to figure it out, and I was not going to be able to watch the show because I would be obsessing over who this was. In case you're interested, it's the guy who plays the X-rated movie stand-in in Love Actually. That's who he is. That's who Dr. Watson is. And I was so happy to find that out because then I was able to actually enjoy and watch the rest of the show. So, okay, and I want to give one other television pitch. If any of you were at Reno this summer, there was not any panels that I did not try to pitch Primeval. And then which is a British TV show about dinosaur hunters in modern day London. I know, it sounds dumb. And then I am so obsessed with this show that I actually mentioned it in my Hugo speech. And then afterwards, when we were on stage waiting to have our pictures taken, Paul Cornell came over and said, by the way, I wrote an episode of Primeval. Thank you for mentioning it in your speech. Whereupon I totally lost it and had this awful fangirl. So embarrassing. Oh my God, Mr. Cornell, I love that show, and I love you, and I love you. And it was the mammoth. It was the one with the mammoth. I love the part with the mammoth. I love the part where Abby and Cumber are waiting in the church. If you'd like, I could just recite the whole episode. Doing accents and everything. It was a pretty horrible moment. And I'm thoroughly ashamed of myself. But it's a great show. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a great show. And if you watch it, you have to watch it from the beginning. You cannot dive in season 5. You have to go back and, you know, the first 3 seasons are out on DVD. And 4 has been on BBC America, is up on YouTube and various Hulu and things like that, and then, or available from Netflix. And then season 5 will be starting November 12th on BBC America. And it is just, it's ostensibly about, as I say, these rifts in time that opened up, allowing animals to come through from the distant past, creating all sorts of problems, as you can imagine. But what's really wonderful, the writing is subtle, nuanced, ironic, the characters are very clever. You get completely emotionally attached to them. And Andrew Lee Potts, who plays Connor, is, as a paleontologist friend of mine said, ridiculously adorable. Yes, he is. So anyway, it's a great show. I will say that even though it's an adventure show, the women that I have talked to have liked it somewhat better than the men. So I'm thinking, maybe it's Andrew Lee Potts, I don't know. Or maybe it's just that it is a very big, it's a show that's big on relationships. And so somebody said, well, if you loved Primeval, you're going to have to watch Terra Nova, mistakenly imagining that I cared about the dinosaurs in the show. So I watched the pilot of Terra Nova. Have you seen the Terra Nova?
Yeah.
It is so beyond awful. I can't even say. My favorite part was 15 solid minutes of plot explication. As the characters stand, as you all know, Bob, we're here in the protection, where Tyrannosaurus Rex, Spinosaurus, and other really bad things live. Yes, I do know that, Bob, and that's why we have this compound that we're living in here, high walls, although not really high enough. And I would like to further say that the reason we're here is because we screwed up Earth really, really badly, and so I thought we would come here and attempt to screw up the Cretaceous too. Yes, Bob, I know that. So at Sarah just forever, and it's like, you have to be kidding. And I have taken some flack, mostly from George R.R. Martin, about my obsessive love of Primeval, and I would just like to say that is over. I'm not listening to any more criticism of Primeval. I've seen what network American television can do with the subject. So that's the end. How many of you have seen Primeval? Do you love it? Okay, if you don't love it, keep it to yourself. If you do love it, you can come talk to me. If you don't love it, I'm sorry, I'm not in the mood. So anyway, I had to admit at dinner last night that I have watched most of the episodes multiple times, and can in fact recite full episodes by heart. So anyway, this may just mean that I'm entering my dotage, which is a distinct possibility, but it may also be that it's a really good show. I think what it proves is that when you put top-line actors and really good writers on an adventure show, this is the kind of really good result you get. It makes you happy that you watched it. So anyway, okay, that's my riff on that. And then I guess I'm supposed to talk about my writing a little bit. Edith Wharton says that beginning a novel is like beginning a love affair. Writing a novel is like walking across the Gobi Desert barefoot, and finishing a novel is like recovering from a long illness. I would like to say that having spent 8 years in the Gobi Desert, that I'm feeling a little better now. Not much, but slightly. I'm still in the recovery period. I have recovered sufficiently to start writing a new novel, but I realized that I wasn't completely recovered because when my agent called me and said he wanted to talk about actually signing the contract for this new novel, I burst into tears. So I guess I'm still a little freaked by the possibility of once again being 6 years late on a novel. But I am working on a new novel, and I know it will not be set in my Oxford historian's world. I have to take a break from that. And so I am writing a novel about alien abduction, Roswell, Area 51, Las Vegas, the Liberace Museum, which recently closed, and it is, of course, a romantic comedy. So, because I don't think anybody else has done that. I had done a lot. I actually was going to write this book before I wrote Blackout All Clear. But right in the middle of my plotting of that novel and doing all the research was 9/11. And since I wanted to make fun of Americans and kind of smack them upside the head for being dopes in that book, I decided that I would postpone the book because people who are scared and or nervous and or have just had a profound shaking up of the psyche are not people who are laughing and are not people who should ever be smacked upside the head for being dopes. However, now they're back to their usual cautious behavior, so I feel it's time to write this book. I can't say much about the book except that I am close to finishing the plotting of it, and then we'll begin the writing. It usually takes me about a year to a year and a half to plot my books. And then I can guarantee that Monument Valley will be in the correct place, where it actually is, as opposed to all over the place in Western movies. For some reason, John Ford either was A, not clear on the concept of where Monument Valley was, or B, not clear on the concept of the West in general. But he has been known to put, he's probably the worst offender, because in Stagecoach, it's somewhere between Tucson and Lordsburg. And then in Fort Apache, it's somewhere up north, kind of, in New Mexico. And then in other movies, it's in Utah and Colorado and Wyoming and all kinds of places. It's actually, Monument Valley is actually in northern Arizona. And so I will see to it that Monument Valley is really there, or I will give you an explanation for why it's been moving around. Ford claims that he didn't care. He was trying to produce a mythic West, and he didn't really care anything about the actual West. All I know is that when I saw the movie Thelma and Louise, I was absolutely standing up ranting by halfway through the movie, because you cannot start out from Missouri, heading toward Mexico, and end up at the Grand Canyon. I don't care how lost you get. It's not possible. So, in fact, it's hardly possible to end up at the Grand Canyon anyway, unless you are just going to the Grand Canyon. So, I will attempt to fix that. I will attempt to give you my opinions on vanity plates, talk radio, and other things in the West. So I have never written a book about the West. I've lived in it most of my life and love the West. And so I love Western movies and want to do all those things, stick all that stuff in there. So I think it will be fun. And no, it will not be just like Paul. No, it will be a different kind of book. So, and I'll be reading from it at my readings. And let's see what else. I've been writing stories. I finally wrote my Robot Who Wants to Be a Rocket story. It's out of Amazon this month. It's called All About Emily. And I was talking to Greg Bear and a couple of other writers, and they said, what are you working on? I said, well, I wrote this robot story. And they said, oh no, we're working on robot stories too. Cheers about it. And I said, well, really, I don't they overlap, and they were like, well, yeah, but you better tell us, because we don't want to all write the same robot story. So I said, well, it's about this robot who wants to be a rocket. And they're like, oh, jeez. Apparently there was no overlap. And I had wanted to do it because I absolutely adore the Rockettes, and I love the line from chorus line, which is the first line of my story, which is, fuck the red shoes, I want it to be a rocket. Which my favorite character in chorus line says, because everybody else has been rhapsodizing about the ballet and how wonderful the red shoes was. But the Rockettes is where it's really at. But what I really love about the Rockettes is that most people don't know that they actually saved Radio City Music Hall. They were the ones who, it was about to be torn down. In fact, I have a book about Radio City Music Hall written at the time of when it was about to be torn down. And the last chapter is just awful because it says, in spite of all of our best efforts, the wrecking balls will in fact descend on Radio City Music Hall in a few weeks. And this book is a tribute to a wonderful place that we wish would not be destroyed, etc. It's just so sad. And they didn't know that the Rockettes were about to save Radios the Music Hall, which I'm always drawn to stories where it looks like all is lost, but really it's not, because ordinary people step forward and do something extraordinary. And we tend to remember all the awful stories in history, but not the ones that turned out better than we expected. So I love the fact that the Rockettes went out and stood in, the middle of winter in their little skinny Rockette outfits on all sides of the building. They surrounded the building, each of them with a clipboard for petitions to rescue the building and to make it into a national, what do they call them, historic landmark. And they were out there for days in the middle of winter, which, if you've ever been in Manhattan in the winter, the winds that whip around those corners are pretty awful. And so they said, well, they just did it because they didn't want to lose their job. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. So anyway, I've always loved the Rockettes for that reason, and because they were unlikely heroes, and I love unlikely heroes. I spent the last 8 years writing about unlikely heroes. So, and as I get older, I don't know if it's as you get older, you either turn into this awful curmudgeon like George R. R. Martin, I would just like to point out to every time I say science fiction is no good anymore, and people don't know how to do convention, and also, coffee doesn't taste like it did. Oh, George, your old fogey. And so I'm making the signs, get off my lawn. You either go that direction, or you begin to cling desperately to the positive stories that are out there that convince you the world isn't in fact going to hell in a handbasket. Which of course it is. It always is. It always is, and it always has been. And hasn't so far. So, we're always at the edge of the abyss, but with a little luck and goodwill, that isn't what will happen. And my latest great story is that my husband has started, well, this isn't a great story, this is a bad story. My husband has started collecting sewing machines. He used to collect slide rules, which were small, and now he's collecting treadle sewing machines, which do not fit in the drawer. So, and he's up to like 60. And halfway through this convention, I expect a call from him saying, can you run up to LA? I've got this guy up there who has a treadle, and you can bring it home on the plane. So anyway, that's the bad part of the story. The good part is that he's found out all this stuff about, Singer and the history of the sewing machine and stuff. But one of the coolest stories that he came up with was, there's another kind of machine called the Wilcox and Gibbs, which was invented about the same time as Singer. Looks different. Instead of having this traditional Singer head, it's got like a curve. It looks like over the rainbow or something. And very pretty machine. Anyway, Wilcox and Gibbs started their partnership in 1859. And in 1861, the Civil War broke out. And Gibbs was a Southerner, so he went south to support the Confederate cause. And at the end of the war, he came totally penniless, completely wiped out. All he owned was his Confederate uniform. He had to borrow a suit from his brother in order to be able to go north to New York, and he had to borrow the train fare to get there. And he went north to beg Walcott for money because, of course, his business had been completely wiped out. The South had been completely wiped out. And he went to New York, and Walcott said, I kept the business going, and I have taken your half and put it in the bank all these years. And here it is. And he came home a millionaire. And the two were in partnership for the rest of their lives. So, which just cheered me up enormously. Oh my gosh, everyone is a Gordon Gekko, it's just really reassuring that there are good people in the world. And then when I was telling this story to somebody, they said, oh yeah, and in the Japanese internments, the internment of Japanese Americans, many of the neighbors, the property was seized, your house would be seized if you were taken off to the camps. But many of the neighbors went in and took all of the stuff out of the houses and stored it for their friends and neighbors so they could have it, which is lovely, lovely. So anyway, those stories cheer me greatly. They warm me in my old age. So all right, that's it. That's all I have to say, except that there's absolutely nothing behind the Roswell UFO thing. And twice a day now, because I'm writing this book, people come up to me and say, would you like to talk to someone who's really been abducted? And I say, no. Very much not. So I did not feel this way when I started the research. When I originally started the research, my theory was that there was some kernel of something, you know, behind the story, and that kernel would be where the really interesting stuff lay. And no. I think a really good example is the mortician in Roswell, who his story is that 2 days after the crash, the UFO crash, he received a call from the Air Force Base asking him how many child-sized coffins he had. And then when he told them saying they would like to buy them, well, actually, no, that isn't what happened. They asked him to come out to the Air Force Base, and while he was there, they asked him how many child-sized coffins he had. And then as he was leaving, he saw the autopsy being performed on one of the aliens. Well, he didn't actually see it himself. He was dating this nurse, and she saw it, and she told him about it when they were out on a date. And she drew a picture of it for him on a napkin, which he lost. And no, you can't talk to her because she was transferred to Europe, and the plane she was on mysteriously crashed over the Atlantic. And then when you say to him, but there were no plane crashes over the Atlantic in 1948, he says, she became a nun. And she asked me not to tell anyone. Totally trustworthy. So all the stories are like that. All of the stories are like that. And with me anxiously looking for my little kernel of truth, what I really discovered was they know what it was. They know it was a secret project involving weather balloons and sonic detection equipment that they were floating over the USSR to listen in and see if they were doing above-ground testing of atomic bombs. And one of them, prevailing winds caused one of them to go awry. They know which one. They know where it should have landed. It landed right where it landed, and in fact was identifiable by the fact that they had run out of the tape that they were using to tape the weather balloons together, and were using some decorative tape with pink and purple flowers on it, which was found at the crash site and identified as being a bizarre alien pattern. So anyway, I'm not saying I'm a skeptic. I'm not saying I'm not going to have an introduction in this novel. I'm just saying, you know. So I'm just saying that I find it interesting that the year that this all blew up and got really fascinating and everybody started talking about it was the same year that the Air Force Base closed in Roswell and the economy completely collapsed. And that but the coming of the UFO nuts brought it right back up to the top of economic stability. So I'm just saying, you know? So anyway, but Roswell is this great tacky place. If you've never been there, it's wonderful. And the best part of it is you come into town where the McDonald's has UFO stuff and the Walmart has UFO stuff and there's UFO stuff everywhere. But the sign as you come into town says, "Welcome to Roswell. dairy center of the Southwest. You guys are in deep denial. That isn't why anyone's here. So anyway, I plan to have a great deal of fun with this book. And I've always wanted to do a road picture, and this is my road picture. And I've always wanted to stick a whole bunch of disparate people in a vehicle and send them careening around the Southwest, falling in love and having adventures and practically killing each other, and you know, all that stuff. So plus aliens. So anyway, and no, Harrison Ford won't be in it, although I'm sure he'll be mentioned. Okay, so now I'll take your questions if you have burning questions. Yes.
You said that it takes you a year to a year and a half to plot a novel. Why does it take so long? How extensive are your outlines? And do you have any suggestions on plotting?
Okay, well, I did have one famous novelist who shall remain nameless in this room. He's not here, I didn't mean that, but I won't tell you his name. Who said to me, what is wrong with you? I can write 5 novels in the time it takes you to plot one of them. Oh, shut up. Everybody works differently. You know, I am not happy unless I have the whole novel plotted. My mystery plots, and you can't do a mystery plot without planting clues unless you know where you're going and how the thing is going to end. In fact, one of the reasons that Blackout All Clear took so long to write, including the fact that it was just this enormous honking book, is that I halfway through decided that the ending that I had worked out was not going to work, and that I needed to come up with a brand new ending. And since it was time travel, none of the endings I was coming up with could possibly work, because time travel just keeps kicking you in the pants, you know. You keep saying, okay, I'll have this happen, and this is why they're stuck in the past. And then, but even then, no matter how long it took them to get the time machine working, they could still come and get them on the same day. So, you know, you have to deal with all those time travel problems. So it took me another 2 years then, in the middle of that book, to come up with a new ending and to get the book the way I wanted it to be. You know, everybody writes differently. Nancy Kress doesn't like to do that. Nancy Kress, who writes wonderful novels, she works best if she can come up with a situation, a starting point, and then just go. And she says if she plots the whole thing out, it sort of dies under her hands, you know, and she loses all of her story. And some people plot out the big points, but then, you know, change the book 100 times before they get to the end. I want to know where I'm going so that I can stick all my foreshadowing in, and so I can get all of my clues planted without you realizing they're clues. And that is done best moving forward as opposed to going back and doing all that after you've written the book. So that's why it takes me so long. As to advice, I think every writer has to figure out what their method is and what works best for them. Every time I'm on a panel about how do you write, all of the panelists, we stare at each other in complete shock that anyone could possibly work the way that these people are saying they work. And they're staring at us in shock because they can't believe it either. So, you know, it's just everybody has their own method. You have to figure out what works best for you. And I really like, I don't plot everything. And in Doomsday Book, my original plan was for Mr. Dunleavy to go back to the past by himself. And then, but after I had invented Colin, and after Colin had run around through the entire book, I realized, oh my God, there's no way Colin is going to let him go by himself. It's just not going to work. And then sat down and decided that worked better. I never get, my blind spot is, writers tell me all the time, oh, I was writing my book and then my characters just got up and said, well, I'm not doing that, and I'm going to do this. And they started talking back to me and saying, I'm not dying, I'm going to be the main character. And I'm like, you know, my characters do what I goddamn tell them to do. I'm in charge. If I say die, they die. Okay? But I do think that a lot of times along the way you think of something better, and then if it's better, then you do it. But Eileen Gunn and I were talking this morning about, the one thing this is my one piece of concrete advice, you will get brilliant ideas, okay? Do not trust these ideas. Don't ever start implementing a brilliant idea until you have a sort of cooling off period. 3 months. And I said, I think you're good. I think that's probably good. But I have had many brilliant ideas, which the next day, suddenly all of the problems occurred to me that I had not been willing to think about the night before. If I implement this brilliant idea, yes, this will be fixed, but this will go completely to pieces. So, yes?
Is the Roswell novel set in present time or sometimes past?
It's set in present time. It's not set in 48. It's set right now. So, in fact, my poor heroine, she's a very great skeptic, but she is in Roswell, not of her own choosing. She's there because her crazy ex-college roommate is getting married, and so she had to go there. Yes.
What is it called? Do you have a title yet?
Right now, it's called The Road to Roswell, but we'll see. That's a working title. So, yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Here's $2. Can you tell one of your Sean McCarthy stories?
And the answer is, here's your $2 back because Shauna threatened me earlier. I told anybody anything, she was going to kill me. Shauna and I have been very good friends for a long time. She was my first book editor. Well, Jim Frankel edited my short story collection, Firewatch, and then Shauna was my editor at Asimov's for several years, and then she moved to Bantam and was my editor for Lincoln Streams and for a good part of Doomsday Book. So she's a very good friend and is partly responsible for how well my career has gone. So I hesitate to make her mad. She's mean. She'll do something to me. Yeah. Sure. I can tell lots of nice stories about her. My daughter, we went one time to see Shauna and her husband in their apartment, and she totally won my daughter over, who I think was about probably 8 or 9. And you know, most people with kids, they're very sort of, you know, hi, sweetie, would you like a lollipop? You know, no matter if they're 15, you know. So anyway, Shauna brought out caviar and champagne and served Cordelia first. And Cordelia said, at that point I fell in love with Shauna and I've loved her forever. She treated me like an adult. And then she said, and then I could tell all of my friends that I had tasted caviar and champagne. So, yes, so she was wonderful. Wonderful to Cordelia. And Shauna is still one of Cordelia's big heroes. So my daughter is so cool, and I was horrified at Reno because these 3 eager young ladies came up to me and they said, are you Connie Willis? And I said, why, yes, I am. And they said, you guys, it's Cordelia's mom! My daughter Cordelia is a costumer, and she choreographs and creates comedy musical skits for Comic-Con, and this last year, I don't remember what they won this last year. The year before, they won Best in Show at Comic-Con, and she has won awards every year she's participated. So she is a star, and as I found out, so when I was relegated to the position of her mother, and it is only because we share our love for Primeval that we talk about 3 or 4 times a week that our relationship has survived. So, but she is truly following the bizarreness of her parents' footsteps, because by day she is a forensic scientist, and for several years was in charge of narcotics at her crime lab. So I could say to people, she lives in California and does drugs. And they ask her what kid was like. And then, but now she's doing audiovisual crime, And the other day, you may have seen her, she was on CNN, because there was a workplace shooting at a quarry in Cupertino, and then the guy escaped, and there was manhunt, and it went on all day before they caught him. So they kept taking photographs. The forensics crew, and my daughter was the one with the orange sneakers on. So after which the lab had a huge discussion of whether they should all wear uniforms to the crime scene. So anyway, and that day was just, I felt epitomized her life in that she, during the day, spent all day at this awful crime scene, which was pretty bloody. She's a blood spatter expert also, so she's in charge of all blood spatter crimes. And anyway, that was what she did all day. And then she went home, changed into her costume and her red long curls, and appeared in HMS uniform. She lives sort of a strange schizophrenic life that fits our lifestyle very well. So anyway, yeah, question?
A lot of your novels are set in the past, of which you give us a lot of information. How do you decide what type of information to put in, what type of information to leave out? Because I know you know everything about what you...
Right. It's sort of the iceberg principle. He's asking about how much research do you put in your books. It's kind of the iceberg principle. You've got to have way more below sea level than above. And I'm sure you've all read those books where it's very clear that the author is saying to you, I did all this research on 13th century weaving, and by God. And I always try to remember that only I was interested in the minutia of this stuff, that interested, and nobody else is as interested. And you're just trying to give a little flavor. It's kind of like, you can't really write dialect. If you write true dialect, it's like Joel Chapman Harris, and you can't read it, it's unreadable. And so research is sort of the same way. When you write what people perceive as dialect, you're actually just giving a flavor of that dialect. You're not really writing an actual dialect. And so you do the same thing with the research and leave it out, and then people can ask you later if they want to know more about it. But I always feel there are three kinds of research that you have to do. One is just the general, stuff, general research. And when I wrote Doomsday Book, I actually knew nothing about the Middle Ages. It's not my favorite period. It's dirty, dark, dangerous, and full of germs. And so I had to do a whole bunch of just really general research just to find out what I could and couldn't do in my story. Like, for instance, I would be wanting to have my heroine Kivrin talking to the priest, and I was like, okay, could a young unmarried girl talk to the priest? Under what circumstances could she talk to the priest? Where would they be when she talked to him? Would he come to the house? Would she go to the church? What would people think of her being seen talking to the priest? All those things. I didn't know the answer to any of them. So I had to just do general stuff for that. And then there's a second kind of research, which is that specific stuff. You want your character to put on, what? Mittens? Gloves? What do the mittens look like? And are they going to ride sides out on a horse or astride, or all these different little bitty questions. Those take forever because you can't just Google that. And so you have to look through endless amounts of material to get the answer. But then I think there's a harder kind of research, and that is what I like to call, Nabokov called it the secret nerves of the book. And these are the things that shape the story and that are not just pieces of research and local color, that actually are critical to the story. And one of those things for me in Doomsday Book was when I read that every village had a bell, and you would recognize the bell, and the bell was used all the time. It was kind of like CNN. It was their equivalent of CNN. So there was a bell in the morning to send you to the fields, and there was a bell in the evening to bring you home from the fields. It played for they rang the bell for weddings and funerals, 9 bells for a man, 3 for a woman, and 1 for a child. If a child was lost in the forest, they would constantly ring the bell to serve as a sort of homing device. If armed forces were coming toward your village, they rang the bells to tell that you to get out the militia, etc. So there was this constant use of bells. And when the plague came to England, the effect was that you could actually hear the plague coming. Because the village, it came from, for some reason, from west to east, came around to Plymouth, landed there, and came east. That you would hear this village over here, and you would recognize, of course, all the different bells of the different villages. And this village over here, they're tolling a funeral a day, and then 2 funerals, and then 3 funerals, and then pretty much non-stop funerals, and then nothing. And in the meantime, this village, and this village, this village, and this village start tolling funerals to the point that you know some awful, awful thing is headed toward you, but you have no idea what it is. And the church, of course, was the government of the day. And like all governments, they came up with a ridiculous response to the problem, which was to outlaw all ringing of bells. And so at that point, this deadly silence settled over the land. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's it. That's it. That's the secret nerves of this book is this, it's the end of the world. And the bells are telling us that that's what's happening. So that, and I think that kind of research is the hardest to do because you don't know what you're looking for and you don't recognize it until you find it. And it doesn't mean anything to a million people who would read that piece of research, but it means everything. That's the worst kind. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, you're talking about the Roswell thing, and I agree with you about it being fake. That's how I started. Roswell was not big on the U.S. until the 80s.
Exactly.
And the CIA actually admitted to the New York Times in the late 90s that they deliberately fanned those flames to protect the stealth technology experiments.
Wow.
The real aircraft experiments going on in Area 51 in China Lake and the fast aircraft. Whenever something would crash, it wasn't so much that they invented it themselves.
Right.
It was a tiny little rumor, and they actually had people in newspapers encourage people to build this up, and even when a plane would crash, they would clean it up, and then when the little UFO people would come out, they would put other kinds of metal in there to treat it.
And it doesn't take much.
If you look at all the movies and X-Files, all of that is during the stealth technology expansion.
Right.
It was kept so secret.
Right.
This was a great smoke screen to cover up what they were doing.
Right, and if you read the stuff about Area 51, what people are describing is this UFO, which is black, delta-shaped, and undetectable by radar, which is, of course, the stealth. So, yeah. So, yes?
Do you have a sense of what time period you might have next if you might do another Oxford story?
If I do another Oxford story, I have been thinking about one of the things that I'm fascinated. I love Hollywood. I've written about Hollywood before in Remake, and it's a time and place that I love. And so there are many lost movies. I mean, they're totally lost. The combination of the celluloid film going to do the fires, and the fact that they would recycle the film in the early days for the silver, and then, so these ceased to exist. The reason we had a few years ago this sudden appearance of all these Buster Keaton shorts was because somebody had moved into a house and was cleaning out the garage and found all these film cans and called the studio and said, I don't know if this is anything you want, but I have all these film cans, Mark Keaton. And Buster Keaton had, in fact, lived in that house at one point, and so they suddenly got back the only copy. Other movies, the only copy exists because they're in Australia. Because when they shipped movies to Australia, it wasn't worth it financially to have them ship them back. So in theaters all over Australia were these piles of film cams. And so several movies that had been thought lost have actually now been rediscovered, which is wonderful. There are also some coming out of Russia because, of course, with the coming down to the Berlin Wall and everything, now we're able to go in and say, do you guys have any of these old movies? Because we're looking for them. But in spite of all that, there are many things that are just lost. Like there's a Dorothy and Lily and Gish movie that's gone. And there are a number of movies that are simply known about, but we don't have any copies of them at all. And so it just seemed to me like that would be a good thing to send something back to Hollywood in the 1920s or 30s. Plus, they get a chance to meet Fred Astaire, which is always a bonus. I'm kind of a Fred Astaire nut, so. And it just seemed to me that that might be something that would lend itself well to my Oxford stories. In many ways, I consider Blackout and All Clear to be the end of my saga, with mostly happy endings all around. But I may want to return and do something. It will be something interstitial, though. It won't be. You know, one of the things I hate about series is that you undo. You know, you get the characters together, you know, and everybody's really happy because you finally got these two characters together, and then you immediately break them up in the next book and move on, or you keep having to do things just to keep the story going. You have to keep doing stuff to characters who have really, and what you do to them sort of invalidates what you had happened to them before. And I hate that. I want the good things I do to my characters to stay put. If my characters fall in love and get married, I want to leave them married. And if they die, I don't want to retrieve them again through some magic act in the next book, because I live in a universe where loss is real and permanent and love is real and permanent, and I want to reflect that in my stories. So I don't want to do anything to tamper with that. But people are always coming to me and saying, I was convinced you were going to do such and such, you were going to kill this character, you were going to do this. And I'm like, never do that. Never. In the real world, everybody dies. But in literature, not everybody dies. And so if you're going to kill characters, you have to think long and hard about it. And they have to be good deaths. They have to be deaths that accomplish something. And so I don't believe in just willy-nilly killing characters. So, although I'm sure some of you would disagree having read my books, but I do think a lot about it. I do take it very, very seriously. And so I don't know what I'll do, but that would be the most likely possibility now. And it, of course, would be a comedy instead of crazy old Hollywood stuff, which I love. So, yes. One last question, maybe? Yeah, go ahead.
What was the process that you went through for a while? How did you proceed?
Oh, To Say Nothing of the Dog. The title is from A 3 Minute Vote, To Say Nothing of the Dog. That's the real title of Jerome K. Jerome's book. To Say Nothing of the Dog is the little subtitle thing. And I had to fight so hard with my publishers for that title. They said, no one will know what this means. I'm like, I know, but it'll be funny. Yeah, they fought me. The greatest disappointment of my life was, well, no, I mean, in the scheme of things, I'm sure I've had greater disappointments, but greatest literary disappointment of my life was that I wanted to call Passage Working Cape Race, because the book is, of course, about the Titanic. And Jack Phillips, who was the person on the telegraph that night, the night of the Titanic, he was sending out, it was like, midnight on Sunday night when the crash came. And he was sending out an assortment of messages, the wish you were here, see you on Tuesday, in New York, things like that. All those messages that had piled up over the weekend. And he got a message from, an ice message that would have told them that they were entering an ice field and that they needed to slow down. And he cut off the operator in mid-message and said, and typed back, shut up, shut up, I am working Cape Race, which was this relay station. And so he did not get the critical message that would have told him that something terrible was likely to happen. And we do this all the time in our lives, constantly. We are always working Cape Race, and we are never paying attention to what we should be paying attention to. And so I really wanted to call the book that, and my publishers just said, it's too obscure, nobody will get it. I'm like, they'll get it once they read the book, they'll understand it once they read the book. But that was not good enough for me. So they came up with, they had me come up with Passage, which I like that title. It's my title, I came up with that title. However, everyone I talk to calls the book Passages, which is a book by Gail Sheehan, which is a pop psych book. So I'm really sorry that I couldn't recall it. Maybe in some alternate universe. So, anyway, thank you very much.